Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're tuning in, well, we already know a bit about you. You're a curious learner.
Right, someone looking for that practical aha moment.
Exactly. You want that insight without having to wade through hours of dense information. We totally get that. And today's focus is incredibly relevant for anyone trying to master a skill that constantly feels just out of reach.
It's a very common frustration,
It
yeah.
really is. Today we're examining excerpts from a very specific guide. It's called Breaking the Translation Barrier, Thinking Directly in English.
Which is such a great title.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how to stop your brain from completely freezing up during conversations and to really learn the mechanics of thinking directly in a second language. Okay, let's unpack this.
It is a mission that resonates with almost anyone who has tried to learn a language as an adult. I mean, to truly understand the solution, we first have to look at the anatomy of the problem itself.
Yeah, the root of the issue.
Exactly. Picture a scenario that is probably painfully familiar to you. You're standing at a networking event or maybe a social gathering. You know the vocabulary. You have studied the grammar extensively.
You've put the work in.
You really have. But then the person across from you asks a wonderfully simple question, something as basic as, "Where are you from?" or "What do you do for work?"
Oh, I know this feeling.
Right. In that split second, total chaos erupts inside your head. Your brain immediately scrambles to translate their English question into your native language.
Like a panic button gets hit.
It is. Once it does that translation, it formulates your brilliant response in your native language. Then it frantically tries to translate that response back into English, searching for the correct verb tenses, the right prepositions.
And all of this is happening in what, a fraction of a second?
Supposedly. But while this invisible mental gymnastics routine is happening, your heart rate spikes, your confidence plummets, the silence stretches out uncomfortably, and, well, the conversational moment simply passes you by.
That freeze response is so incredibly frustrating. You walk away from the interaction thinking about how much time you've spent studying, yet you still sound like a beginner when you're put on the spot.
Which is completely unfair to yourself.
Yeah, it feels like a personal failure or, a sign that you just don't have an aptitude for languages.
Which brings us to the most validating insight from our source material today. The text makes it absolutely clear that this is not a reflection of your English ability. It's not about your intelligence.
You are not broken.
You are not broken at all. The issue is simply the internal operating system your brain is relying on. You're forcing your brain to act as a real-time, simultaneous translator rather than a direct communicator.
Those are two completely different cognitive processes, right?
It's entirely different.
Looking at the source material, it's fascinating to see where this habit actually originates. I mean, we didn't just wake up one day and decide to process language in the most stressful way possible.
No, we were trained to do it.
Right. This is a direct byproduct of the traditional classroom environment. Think about the mechanics of how we're taught in school. A teacher writes a sentence on the chalkboard in your native language and instructs the class to translate it.
Step by step.
Exactly. You sit at your desk, you look at the words, and you systematically convert them into English. It's presented as a math puzzle to be solved.
A very rigid formula.
Yeah. Step 1, identify the thought in your native language. Step 2, apply the translation formula. Step 3, produce the English output.
And that systematic approach is entirely logical for a classroom setting. When you're sitting at a desk, you have the luxury of time. You can pause, you can consult your memory for a grammar rule, you can erase a mistake.
You can polish the sentence before you ever have to produce it.
Exactly. But the real world does not operate on a chalkboard. In a real conversation, ideas flow at a rapid, unpredictable pace. The person you're speaking with is not going to hit a pause button and wait patiently while you run your internal translation software.
That would be nice, but it doesn't happen.
What's fascinating here is how the source material visualizes this cognitive overload. They draw a comparison to trying to drive a car on a busy highway while constantly looking down to check a paper map every 5 seconds.
Oh, that analogy perfectly captures the anxiety of it. If you're driving at 60 miles an hour, taking your eyes off the road to look at a map and then looking back up the traffic pattern has completely changed.
You're suddenly in a completely different situation.
Right. And if you keep doing that, you're eventually going to miss your exit, or worse, you're going to crash. In this context, the conversation crashes.
Yeah.
You lose the thread of what the other person is saying because you're too busy looking down at your internal translation map.
Precisely. Your brain is attempting to run two incredibly demanding systems simultaneously. It's holding on to the anchor of your first language, actively running a translation algorithm, and then trying to generate the English output.
It's just too much.
The human brain simply isn't designed to maintain that level of cognitive juggling in real time without eventually freezing up.
The text actually offers another analogy that I think illustrates the physical toll this takes on a learner. Running those two systems at once is described as carrying two backpacks on a hike.
Oh, I love this one.
It's so vivid.
Mhm.
Imagine heading out for a long trek, but instead of packing efficiently, you strap one heavy backpack to your chest and another heavy backpack to your shoulders.
It would be exhausting.
It requires so much extra energy just to take a single step. And this completely explains why learners often report feeling physically and mentally exhausted after just 10 or 15 minutes of speaking English.
Because the brain is quite literally doing double the work for a fraction of the result.
Exactly.
And that double workload is the core barrier. It makes every single sentence feel like a massive hurdle. Recognizing this changes the entire approach to fluency.
Because the goal shifts.
Yes. The ultimate goal isn't to go memorize another 500 vocabulary words or drill another set of obscure grammar rules. You already have the tools. The goal is to drop the extra backpack.
We have to transition away from the translation software entirely because fluent speakers simply do not translate. Here's where it gets really interesting. A fluent speaker possesses a direct, instantaneous connection between an idea in the physical world and the English word for it.
There is no middleman involved.
None at all. Let's examine how the text breaks that down.
Sure. So if you're walking through a park and you see a dog running across the grass, a brain stuck in translation mode goes through a sequence. It registers the animal, fetches the word for that animal in the native language, and then searches its database for the English equivalent.
Which takes time.
Right. But a fluent speaker's brain completely bypasses the native language. They see the animal, and the brain instantly registers the concept of dog. It is a direct bridge from the visual idea to the English word.
And the text points out that this applies to internal states and feelings just as much as physical objects. If your stomach starts rumbling, you don't build a complex linguistic equation to explain your biological state. The thought simply materializes, I'm hungry. The physical sensation and the language are fully integrated.
They are one and the same in that moment.
But looking at this critically, it's easy to assume that fluent speakers just possess some innate gift. I mean, how does an adult who has relied on their native language for decades actually build that direct bridge?
That is the critical hurdle. And the text emphasizes that fluent speakers are not born with this mechanism. They actively train their brains to do this through context and exposure.
Like a muzzle.
Very much like a muscle. The simplest comparison is how a toddler learns their very first language. A child looks at a glass of water and hears the sound water. They do not have a pre-existing native language to act as a filter.
They just make the connection directly.
Right. Their brain naturally forms a direct, unfiltered connection between that clear liquid and the sound. The reassuring news from our source material is that adult brains retain this neuroplasticity. We are perfectly capable of training our brains to bypass the translation step, provided we use the right daily techniques.
The practical application of this is where the guide really delivers. You don't need to enroll in an expensive immersion program or relocate to an English-speaking country to do this.
I don't know.
The requirement is just daily, intentional awareness. The first technique the source outlines to build these direct bridges is called self-narration.
Self-narration is a remarkably straightforward concept, but its impact on cognitive processing is profound.
It essentially involves providing a running commentary on your own life, either out loud or internally, as the events are happening.
Right, just describing your day.
So if you're standing in your kitchen in the morning, you actively think to yourself, I am making coffee. When you sit down at your desk, I am opening my laptop. While preparing dinner, I am cutting vegetables. You're tying the physical action directly to the English phrasing in real time.
It forces that direct connection.
But I do wonder what happens when a learner inevitably hits a roadblock. Say you're narrating your morning routine and you suddenly realize you don't know the English word for the spatula you're holding. Doesn't that immediately force the brain back into translation mode?
That is a very common trap, and the text addresses it beautifully. The rule of self-narration is that you do not stop to look up missing words.
You just keep going.
You keep going. If you don't know the word for spatula, you bypass it. You say, I am cooking, or I am using this tool. The primary objective here is not building a massive vocabulary or achieving grammatical perfection.
So it's not a vocabulary test.
Exactly. The objective is maintaining the English-only mindset. If you pause your narration, pull out your phone, and translate the word from your native language, you have just picked the heavy backpack up again.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
By bypassing the unknown word and keeping the flow, you forge that direct connection between the action and the language you do possess.
You're essentially tricking your brain into treating English as the default language for observing reality.
Exactly.
And to build on that, the text introduces a second, complementary technique called question thinking. This shifts the focus from narrating actions to processing decisions.
Kicking it a step further.
Right. You deliberately ask and answer simple questions inside your own head. For example, standing in front of the refrigerator, you ask yourself in English, what should I eat for lunch? And then you formulate the answer, I think I will eat pasta.
Or if you're browsing a streaming service.
Yeah, exactly. What movie do I want to watch tonight?
Yeah.
Followed by, maybe I will watch a comedy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this internal Q&A is doing some heavy neurological lifting. Think about the structure of human interaction. It is essentially a continuous loop of questions, ideas, and answers.
That's all conversation really is.
Right. By simulating that complete cycle within your own mind, you are normalizing the English language. It ceases to be a stressful academic subject that you only encounter on a chalkboard or during high-stakes meetings. It becomes a functional, everyday tool for internal thought.
A functional tool for thinking.
Yeah?
That shifts the entire paradigm. Because ultimately, speaking is just thinking out loud.
Exactly.
If the internal thought process is smooth, the external speech will be smooth. But as we look at how to apply this, we have to confront a massive psychological barrier that the source highlights. Many learners harbor this deeply ingrained belief that true fluency requires speaking in long, highly complex, almost poetic sentences.
It is arguably the most common pitfall for adult learners. The psychology behind it is fascinating and often rooted in ego.
Ego, how so?
Well, as adults, we are used to expressing nuanced, sophisticated thoughts in our native language. When we switch to English, we naturally try to map that same level of complexity onto our second language.
Because we don't want to sound less intelligent.
Precisely. But the moment a learner attempts to construct a sprawling, intricate sentence, the cognitive load immediately spikes. The brain starts juggling verb tenses, prepositional phrases, dependent clauses, and word order.
And that is exactly when the system crashes again. That's when you hear learners freeze and start stumbling with, I think, maybe, wait, how do I say? The mental architecture required to support that massive sentence simply collapses under its own weight.
It's too much load for a new system.
The source provides a fantastic contrast to illustrate this. Imagine you're at a nice dinner, and you want to compliment the restaurant. A learner trying to project fluency might attempt to construct a thought like, I believe that this particular restaurant offers a very interesting menu that many people would truly enjoy.
And by the time your brain successfully builds that sentence, the conversation has moved on.
Exactly. Instead, the text suggests simply saying, this restaurant looks interesting. The idea is communicated perfectly without the cognitive collapse.
The source heavily emphasizes the power of these simple phrases. I like this. I am tired today. I need coffee.
Adult learners often resist this because they feel it makes them sound childlike.
They do, but from a functional standpoint, these are not weak sentences. They are highly efficient. And more importantly, simple sentences actively reduce fear.
That is a crucial distinction. It's not about dumbing down your thoughts. It's about making the delivery manageable so you don't freeze.
Precisely. They create forward momentum. The source uses an excellent analogy here regarding construction. If you are building a house, you do not begin by attempting to magically suspend the roof in midair.
You need a foundation first.
Right. You start by laying down small bricks, one by one. Short, simple sentences are your conversational bricks. Every single time you successfully communicate a short sentence without translating, you experience a small psychological victory.
And that builds momentum.
That victory builds confidence. And confidence is the bedrock of fluency because it actively dismantles the anxiety that causes the brain to freeze in the first place.
Don't build the roof first. Lay the small bricks. It requires checking your ego a bit, but the payoff is actual fluid communication.
The payoff is huge.
So we've established that we need to drop the translation backpack and we need to rely on small conversational bricks. To tie this all together into actionable practice, the text outlines a very specific 5-minute daily routine.
A very practical takeaway.
It really is. It's a 3-question exercise designed to force your brain to navigate all the major time frames directly in English.
Navigating timeframes is traditionally where learners get tangled up in translation, so practicing the past, present, and future in isolation is highly effective.
Exactly. The routine is incredibly simple. Question 1 tackles the past. What did I do yesterday?
Yeah.
You respond with a small brick. I watched a movie.
Nice and easy.
Question 2 handles the present. What am I doing today? You respond, I am cooking dinner. And question 3 addresses the future. What will I do tomorrow? You respond, tomorrow I will visit my friend. That is the entire routine. Past, present, future.
This raises an important question, however. How do we ensure that a 5-minute exercise actually alters a deeply ingrained mental habit?
Just 5 minutes.
Right. The text is quite adamant on this point. The secret ingredient is vocalization. You must do this out loud. Even if you're standing alone in your bathroom brushing your teeth, you need to quietly ask and answer those 3 questions audibly.
Why does it have to be out loud?
When your brain generates the thought and your mouth physically produces the sound simultaneously, it reinforces that direct neurological connection. Furthermore, the text stresses that consistency will always beat duration.
That is such a relief for anyone with a busy schedule. 5 minutes of doing this out loud every single day is vastly superior to grinding through a grammar textbook for 2 hours on a Sunday and doing nothing the rest of the week.
Consistency changes the brain.
So what does this all mean for the listener? It means you aren't just memorizing a language anymore. You are fundamentally building a new mental habit from the ground up.
That is the exact framing required for success. The source material offers one final analogy that captures the reality of this transition. Learning to think directly in English is very much like learning to play a musical instrument.
Okay, how so?
When you first sit down at a piano, your fingers feel awkward. You move slowly. You have to consciously think about every single key you press. You make mistakes, and inevitably, your brain wants to retreat to whatever feels comfortable.
And in the context of language, that comfortable retreat is translation.
Exactly.
The brain is constantly whispering, this direct connection is too hard right now. Let's just go back to the chalkboard method. It's slower, but it feels safer.
Exactly. There is a period of neurological resistance. But if you practice laying down those small bricks daily, if you sit at the metaphorical piano for just 5 minutes every morning and narrate your routine, that resistance slowly begins to fade.
It gets easier.
Your brain develops cognitive muscle memory. The awkwardness vanishes, the pauses become shorter, and eventually the thought simply flows into the English language naturally. You stop thinking about the mechanics of the notes and you just play the song.
It's an incredibly encouraging perspective because it demystifies the whole process. It's not about being a linguistic genius, it's just about building muscle memory.
That's all it is.
To synthesize everything we've explored in this deep dive, the first step is recognizing that the exhaustion you feel is real and it's time to take off that heavy translation backpack.
Stop trying to drive the car while staring at a map.
Start laying down those small, manageable conversational bricks instead of trying to build complex roofs right away. Narrate your morning coffee routine. Ask yourself out loud what you are doing tomorrow. And above all, give yourself some grace as you learn to play this new mental instrument.
It takes time.
It's going to feel wobbly and unnatural at first, much like learning to ride a bike. But your brain is built to adapt.
It is entirely capable of adapting. If there is one core takeaway to hold on to from these sources, let it be this: true fluency is born from a consistent, direct connection between your ideas and the language. It does not come from having a flawless grasp of grammatical rules. Focus entirely on the connection and let go of the need for perfection.
Connection, not perfection.
Yeah.
That is exactly the mindset shift required. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over as you begin this daily practice.
I love this part.
We've spent this entire time discussing how to train your brain to bypass your native language and think directly in English. But consider the psychological implications of that success. If you actually build a brain that thinks directly in English, completely free from the filter of your native tongue, will the personality of your English-thinking self be slightly different than your native-speaking self?
That is a fascinating question.
Does the unique vocabulary, the different phrasing, and the specific rhythm of the English language begin to shape your raw thoughts and reactions in a totally new way? It is a fascinating concept to explore as you start forging those direct connections.
The relationship between language and personality is an incredible concept to ponder while you are self-narrating your day. It completely changes the way you view the learning process.
It really does. So keep laying those small bricks, stay consistent, and see who you become in the process. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.